Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sah Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So, after a long time, a long period gap, we will be discussing today the topic which we had earmarked for Saturday, that is Vedanta and the science of human possibilities. So Bhagavad Gita we had last Saturday we had Bhagavad Gita class, which is at 5:45. So now we will continue from where we left, the topic of Vedanta and the science of human possibilities. So we were discussing the verse in the Kathopanishad, which says, who are the people who are the wise people who enjoy eternal peace. So the second chapter of the Kathopanishad explains in great detail. The verse reads as follows: Nitya anityanam chetanas chetananam eko bahunam yo vidadati kaman tam atmastham ye anupashyanti dhira tesham shanti shaswati na itaresham. Means peace is only possible for people who peace belongs to only people, wise persons, and not to others. Na itaresham means not to other people, only to those people who perceive him. Who perceive him means perceive whom? Who perceive one who is the inmost self dwelling within. So our innermost self is what we need to perceive to get permanent peace. To eternal peace is only to be had by wise person. Dhiraha, dhiraha, ye anupashyanti dhira. Dhira means it means wise as well as steady, people of steady wisdom. So, who perceive the innermost self as the consciousness of all that is conscious. Now we see many things in this Prakriti, in this world, which is full of consciousness. As we quoted the famous Sufi mystic who said, consciousness is there in everything. In the stone, it is static. In the animal kingdom, in the plant kingdom, it is quivering, and in the animals or human beings, it is dynamic. So this consciousness is there, the background of all the consciousness that we see outside, who is the eternal in the midst of non-eternal. Nityo anityanam means there are many non-eternal things in Prakriti which exist for a certain moment and then they vanish. So what is the eternal substance behind the non-eternal? Who is the Purusha behind the Prakriti? And who though one, he is one. He dispenses the desired object to many, being the all-knowing Supreme Lord. So what do we mean by that? By this particular verse of the Kathopanishad? It simply means that at the back of every finite center of consciousness, by finite center of consciousness, I mean human beings, animals, plants, or whatever it may be. So at the back of at the back of every finite center of consciousness is the all-pervading consciousness. Means there is something which is all-pervading, which is the consciousness behind the plant, which is the consciousness behind the animal, which is the consciousness behind even the inanimate objects. That is the self of the universe. So that is how the equation Atman is equal to Brahman or Jivatma is equal to Paramatma. There is no difference. It's only through ignorance that we consider ourselves to be limited. So just as the microcosm means the jiva is held, it is sustained and controlled by the individual self. There is something within us when we meditate deeply enough, there is something within us which controls ourself. The ego sense, the mind, the buddhi, and all the layers of prakriti which encase the jiva, the individual self. So the macrocosm, the whole universe is also sustained by the universal self. So we have the individual self, which is the Atma, the universal self, which is the Brahman. So Atman is equal to Brahman. In what condition? So what is innermost? We have to understand. Kathopanishad says that apparently, though they are one, they appear as many. What is innermost in the universe is innermost in every individual. But right now we don't realize that. It is just like a wave is essentially one with the boundless mass of water that the ocean is. So ocean is one big mass of water. Though apparently for the time being we think, oh, this is a big wave, this is a small wave, and we give it different names and forms. So Prakriti also conjures up our minds, different types of mind, different types of personalities, though at the background of all of us is that same universal self. But the individual self is ever united with that supreme self. The Jivatma is one with the Paramatma at the level of the consciousness, despite its apparent limitations. The limitations are due to ajnana or ignorance. So being associated with the ignorance, which gives us the feeling of ego, the feeling of having a body and all those things, the finite self seems to be very limited. We fear death. That is the reason why Nachiketa went to Yama, and in the Kathopanishad, Yama is telling him, only when you realize your identity with the Supreme Self, with God or with Brahman, as pure consciousness, only then there will be eternal peace in your mind. Till then, as long as you consider yourself to be limited due to ignorance, that will lead to lack of peace in the mind. So peacefulness or eternal peace is only attainable by that person who realizes that the Jiva is one with Shiva, or Jiva is one with the Paramatma. The Jivatman is one with the Paramatma. And till he recognizes the nature of both the Jivatma and the Paramatma as not only one, but it is of the nature of pure consciousness, undivided consciousness. So it is like, even though through ignorance, we tend to consider ourselves as weak, but the luminosity or the capacity of the consciousness to manifest, it is not the least affected. That is why a person realizes himself as the knower of Ajnana and says, I do not know myself. The example that is given in Vedanta is, just as fire is enveloped by smoke, but that fire does not lose its radiance. Smoke may envelop it. Due to ignorance, we may not see the bright radiance of the fire. Similarly, even though Ajnana has covered the radiance of the individual self, by it does not lose its inherent luminosity. So the Shvetashvatar Upanishad, which is also another Upanishad, it gives another example. Yathaiva bimbam mrudayopi paliptam tejomayam bhrajate sudhantam tad vat atatvam prasamiksha dehi ekah kritartho bhavate vita shokaha. So the translation of this verse is, just as a lump of gold, suppose there is a lump of gold which is tarnished with dirt, but when you purify it, when you remove the dirt, it shines. the gold which does not lose its the nature to shine. So also the embodied being, seeing the truth of Atman, if he realizes the truth of Atman within, or he realizes his oneness with the Brahman, attains the goal and becomes free from grief. Vita shoka. Vita shoka means he becomes free from grief. Till then, we will continue to grieve for petty things, small things, because of our ignorance. So the only way to get rid of grief, to attain eternal peace, is just by realizing our true nature. So Sri Ramakrishna, that is why he said in the present age, to realize God is the supreme purpose of human life. There cannot be any other purpose. If we consider that there are other purposes which we need to fulfill in our human life, then we have to bear the consequences and bear suffering, bear peacelessness. So man can know God if he can know himself. So he says there is one way of knowing God. We don't know what God is, but if you know yourself, the innermost self is one with the supreme self. So knowing your innermost self is the same as knowing the supreme self. So Jivatma, the true nature of the Jivatma, when the individual ignorance vanishes, you realize as the supreme, you realize yourself as the luminous conscious self. And that luminous conscious self, since it is one with the universal self or Paramatma or Brahman, so this Jivatma loses its identity. It's like the wave merging into the ocean. There is a wave, a big wave, there are some small waves, but ultimately, when the wave subsides, they all become part of that vast ocean. So what the vast ocean is compared to Brahman, and the individual wave which exists for some time, it is transitory. It does not last long. When the wave collapses, and then the wave realizes, the water of the wave realizes that I was always one with that ocean. Only temporarily I had a name and a form. I either became a big wave or sometimes I became a small wave, a wavelet. But behind the small and the big, there is only one, there is only water. That is, the consciousness is uniform, it is unitary, but we consider consciousness as many, and that is why we suffer. So two things Kathopanishad and this Shvetashvatara Upanishad convey to us, that if you want peace, then you have to realize that your individual self, the innermost self, is nothing but it is one with the universal self. That is the goal of all yoga. Yoga means the unification of the Jivatma with the Paramatma. Whether you do it through Karma Yoga, through work also, you can practice yoga. You can do it through Jnana Yoga, through your intellect. You can do it through Bhakti Yoga. So all the yogas are nothing but trying to find that innermost self which is one with the universal self. So now how does this ignorance, that ego, that individual self behave in this world? It is manifest through a particular mode of mind, and that mode of mind is known as ahankara or ego. Further, the more gross this individualized self becomes, it starts identifying itself with more and more gross things, and that the problem increases. The more we identify with the mind, with the organs, with the body, ultimately body is the grossest thing. So as the case may be, we identify with all these different things, but it is the ego, the ahankara, which is the most subtle thing. Through the ahankara, we connect ourselves, we mistake ourselves as our mind, as a happy mind, or as a intelligent mind, or a foolish mind, or sharp organs, or a blind person, or a person who has a wonderful vision, or a strong body, a weak body. These are all external qualities. which is characterized by one I-ness. That ego connects the body, the mind, and creates an impression that I am this mind, I am the organs, I am the body, and that ego is the last thing to go. That is why Sri Ramakrishna says it is so difficult to get rid of the ego. The ego is self-identified with the not self. Not self means the Prakriti, neither of which undergoes actual change due to wrong identification. It's just a wrong identification. Vedanta says that the identification of the wave may feel for some time that it has a particular shape, it has a particular form, but that is only temporary. It does not actually, there is nothing, there is no change there. It is only because of that name and form that the ego comes. And that ego convinces the jiva to identify with these mind, organs, and body, as the case may be. If a person is totally materialistic, very gross, then he'll identify with the body. Some people may be slightly evolved, more evolved than the other people. So they are not behaving like animals, they are slightly refined. So they will identify themselves with their minds. So they say, I have a very intelligent mind, I am a mature person. Some people will say, oh, he is a fool, I am a wise person. But still that ego is connecting to our identity as the mind, identity as the different organs, our identity as the body, the gross body. So the ego is self-identified with the not self. Not self means the mind, all the other things which are constituents of Prakriti. So Prakriti has many aspects. Three gunas give rise to ego, it gives rise to mind, it gives rise to organs, it gives rise to body, it gives rise to inert matter, the objective world around us. There are so many things with which you can identify. A person who is rich may think that I am a rich person. That ego is identifying with uh, that of a rich person. So he thinks he is a rich person. He doesn't realize that it's a temporary identity. He considers himself as a rich person because he has a lot of wealth which he thinks is his own. And as long as he identifies himself with the wealth that he has, so nobody can convince him that he is not a rich person. No matter how much you tell him, that ego doesn't permit him to consider himself as Brahman. He will consider himself as either a rich person or a poor person, as the case may be, or a strong person, a weak person. So this is known as the apparent man. Actually, he doesn't undergo change. Vedanta says you don't have to worry, because the self, the original luminosity of the self is not destroyed. It's a temporary phenomenon. When you hold on to temporary things, the effect of those things are also temporary. That's why Holy Mother used to say that, have you seen, she used to say, when you stand on the top of the bridge, you see below the bridge, the water is passing. Every moment, a new body of water comes and it keeps on flowing. So also she says, the troubles that you encounter, the happiness, that joy that you encounter, these are nothing but waves. They come and go. You just observe all these things. So the apparent man, the happy man, the sad man, the strong man, the weak man, the inferiority complex or the superiority complex that a person has, they are all equivalent to the apparent man. They are not the real self within us. So it is egoism, that ego, ahankara, makes us ties the spirit and matter. There is a beautiful book by a Western psychology which says that, the name of that book, he is a fourth generation psychologist. So I think I forgot his name, but anyway, the name of the book is Marriage of the Matter and the Soul, Marriage of the Sense and the Soul. So the sense organs, the world, objective world around us, and the spirit, when there is a marriage, when they come together because of ego. It is known as Chit Jada Granthi. In Vedanta, it is known as Chit Jada Granthi. We are the Chaitanya, pure Chaitanya, but somehow that is the very nature. That's why Shankaracharya says it is anirvachaniya. We cannot explain. If you ask the question, how did it happen? How did the unreal seem to be real? That is the whole of Maya. So Maya means identification. The apparent man, the eternal man or the real man thinks himself as an apparent man. And what ties the spirit, pure spirit and consciousness and matter? It is the ego. So the spirit seems to take the nature of matter, and matter seems to partake of the nature of spirit. So you think, you identify yourself with your wealth, you identify yourself with a healthy body or a weak body, and such expressions such as I am happy, I am unhappy, I am wise, I am ignorant, I am honest, I am dishonest, I am deaf, I am silent, I am active, I am lazy. So many adjectives we just use, the number of times we use this I in our life, that shows how ignorant we are. It is this, Sri Ramakrishna used to call this I the rascal I. So he used to say, this rascal I does not allow us to stay in peace. It jumps from one attribute to another. If you think, if you try to remove that ego from the wealth that you possess, it will attach itself to something else, to your property. And if you say, I am just a witness, I do not own this property, then it will attach itself to something else. Like I am a holy man, I am fair, I am tall, and all those things. So such expressions as my mind, even when you go to the subtle world, you see how it cheats us. Sometimes we cannot think. When there is too much of knowledge coming, sometimes we develop a mental fatigue. And we tend to believe that my mind is now bombarded with so many ideas that I just can't think. Because thinking is a very difficult thing for most of the people. They would rather do something than think. Because action is gross. It is easy to do something or not do something. But if you ask them to sit quietly and think, after a while they will just throw that book, or maybe they will not be focused enough. So what happens is they tend to believe, the people who have some kind of laziness and they cannot think. So the very fact that ego is associated with this particular thought, that my mind cannot think. Sometimes we come to that stage when we are too exhausted, when we are very tired. You just say, now you just don't tell me all these things. I cannot focus properly. I cannot think. My mind, then there are some people says, no, my mind knows the truth. There is a conviction that I can understand many things. So I do as my mind decides. Now some people are very egotistic. They think, oh, I know everything, or I will do what I feel is correct. So that kind of ego manifests itself in a lot of different forms. So they say these eyes cannot see, these ears can hear, but these eyes can see or it cannot see. Then sometimes we assert and say, these lips will never speak an untruth. These hands will never make a mistake. Or we say sometimes the body feels weak, and how the cognizing and motive power of individual self are attributed to the mind, organs and body. Sometimes we say, I don't have that attitude. I want a positive attitude, but somehow there is a lot of depression. There is a lot of, the body is feeling weak. That's why my mind is, I cannot think. It is, I'm feeling weak. That is also a result of ego. To feel strong is also ego. To feel inferior is also ego. And they are because we identify ourselves with our mind, whether it is strong or weak, We identify ourselves with the organs and the body. All these things, false identification gives rise to a personality which is changing. Every moment it is changing. Now, Swamiji says, what kind of freedom you have? Nature says, nature gives you a little trouble. Somebody comes and scolds you. And nature says, now you weep. So we are at the mercy of nature. We are at the mercy of somebody who comes and utters. We don't look at things subjectively. We just can't detach ourselves. Any Tom, Dick, or Harry may come and tell you that you are a fool and you take it seriously. So we are at the mercy of nature. Nature makes us dance to its tune. So being identified with this body-mind complex and the ego, the person ascribes to himself the eternal objects that concern it. For instance, he says, this is my property, this is my family, this is my profession, this is my position, I am a nationalist, I love my country, I love my race, and expressions such as I am a landlord, I am wealthy, I am a merchant, and all those things. Despite the identification of the self with the not self, that is Prakriti in its various forms, every individual vaguely feels his distinction from the not self. No doubt we have not realized this truth, but that feeling that these are my possessions, now and then a wise person suddenly realizes that what I have been bragging about, is it really mine? Tomorrow something happens to me, where will all this property go? Where will all these things that I have gathered around myself, where will they go? So he vaguely feels, he has not realized, but he vaguely feels that no matter how much what I possess, the type of mind that I boast of, whatever I may have, he, in the heart of his heart, the self knows that this is not eternal. So that feeling that this is not the real self, that is also inherent in a human being. That is why Swamiji says, no matter how bad you are, no matter how many mistakes you make, that self will never be lost. That individual self, maybe for some people, some blows are necessary to break the disillusionment that we are so and so. So our pride is humbled, and nature has its own way of teaching us lessons. So through pain and through pleasure, Swamiji says, in fact, through pain I've learned more. If everything was pleasurable, then I would have been happy with my status quo. I would not have tried for eternal peace. I would not have tried for realization. It is because I am happy, my family, my position, my clothes, if everything is fine, there's no problem, there's no pain in my life, my house, whatever I want, I get. I'm a wealthy person. I can practice my religion, and I am very much proud of my race. So assume that all these qualities or the attributes are met. So he considers himself to be good in every way or lucky in every way. If you ask some of the householders, they will say, oh, my son is well settled. Now, what do you mean? For them, well settled means whether his mind is undergoing turmoil, they don't care. He has a house, because that is their idea of settling down. He has his own house, he is well settled. He has a good salary, he has a good job, he is well settled. If anything goes missing, then he'll say, oh, no, he's trying to settle down. So we think that these temporary things will give us permanent security. But unfortunately, it does not happen. No matter, we are secure because the Atman never dies. But how many of us know? So that is why the Upanishad says, if you want peace of mind, then you have to consider your status. What are the things that are eternal in you? Is there anything eternal? And so Vedanta says, you will never forget your eternal nature. Otherwise, you will never try. You have this consciousness is something which you cannot deny. It is self-evident. So I may say, I may give myself or identify myself with lot of attributes. I am a rich person, I am a poor person. But in the heart of my heart, I know for certain that there is some eternal element. I don't know where it is. I don't know how to find out, uh, find its true nature or realize that for myself. But the sadhana begins when you try to find out the subject which does not change. You try to find out, in my life there are so many wonderful things, so many external situations, and I'm just dancing to its tune. When Swamiji says, when nature says laugh, you laugh, and nature takes away certain things from you, and then the nature will tell you, Prakriti will tell you that now you cry, and we cry. So what kind of independence we have? Things do not go the way we like. But that doesn't mean that there is nothing within us which is not permanent. There is eternal peace. There is that eternal Satchidananda. Only it has to be rediscovered. It's not that it is waiting somewhere outside, that heaven is something I have to attain. Salvation is something I have to attain. I am already free. But I have to remove the bondages. So the real man is, the apparent man is a real man in disguise. It is like I am a king and I go about moving in the market as a thief. I disguise myself as an ordinary person. Normally in the earlier days, the kings used to do that just to hide their identity and just observe how the kingdom is going on. They would go as a humble, a poor man. The king would dress himself with torn clothes and just move around in the kingdom. So that is what Vedanta says, our condition is also like that. We are inheritors or the children of immortal bliss. Shrunvantu Vishve Amrutasya Putra Aye Dhamani Divyani Tastuhu Vedahametam Purusham Mahantam Aditya Varnam Tamasap Parastat. So this verse which Swamiji quoted in the Parliament of Religion, he said, you are heirs to immortal bliss, you are children of immortal bliss. But unfortunately, nature has been constantly brainwashing you and telling you that you are a slave of your organs, a slave of your mind, a slave of your likes and dislikes. The external situation always makes you dance to its tune. So Thakur used to say, even Brahman weeps when it is the Pancha Bhuta. Pancha Bhuter Phande. Phande means when you are bound by, then Brahman also cries. So the pure consciousness, for some strange reason, that is what Maya is all about. That is what Prakriti is all about. For some strange reason, the king disguises himself and moves about in his kingdom as a poor beggar. So the real man disguises himself as the apparent man. The change of the guise doesn't mean the change of the inner man. The inner man is always the same. It's only the disguise that has to be removed, and then the real man is revealed. So also the basis of ego, the conscious self, remains the same. The basis, the conscious self, which gives rise to the feeling of ego. Ego also is a temporary thing. Just as our mind, our body, our organs, everything is temporary, this ego also is not going to remain with us. It is only percolating through the body, through the mind, and it is the unvaried cognizer of the variations. I mean, we know that deep within us, something is observing all this drama of life, good or bad. Though we want things to happen, good things to happen to us, many times bad things also happen. And then we start complaining why bad things are happening. Then we blame the karma, then we blame somebody else. We want good things to happen, but things don't go our way. So the Upanishad says the invariable that you see around you, the uncertainty, the lack of security, the fears, they are all have their root in the ego. So in the midst of that, one should not lose hope. So Vedanta gives a very positive way of analyzing this thing. He said, see, you were thinking I was a grandchild, now I am the grandfather, I was a farmer, then I became a merchant, now I am a politician. So these changing phases show that there is something, some self-identity, some consciousness which was common. The same person who was a merchant now has become a politician. The same person who was a grandson now has become the grandfather after 60, 70 years as he lives his life. Then you sometimes say, yesterday I was unhappy. So there is something within you which has not changed. Otherwise, how will you perceive it? Yesterday I was unhappy, today I feel very happy. So who is that I? I had keen eyesight a year ago, now I almost lost my power of vision. Sometimes we complain. So we have identified with our eyes. So I call myself blind because I can't see, or I consider myself having sharp eyes. I had keen eyesight. Few years ago, I could see things at a distance. Now things have changed. So all these ideas, then the mind also changes. You say, I was so ignorant, I didn't know all these things. But once I read the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, my ideas have been revolutionized. Now the same person who was ignorant and is claiming that once upon a time I was ignorant, but now I can understand things more clearly. Then we say that I was born a Roman Catholic, but I chose to become a Protestant. But then I found that they do not suit my taste. So now I'm an agnostic. So he's the same person, but he has various likes and dislikes which make him change his identity. So that is the apparent man. So another example is given. The sun appears to rise and set. Does the sun really? I mean, it rises and it sets, but the bright luminosity of the sun never changes. It is because you see the rising sun or you see the setting sun, then suddenly you find everything is dark. But that sun, subjectively speaking, is always shining. It is a stationary sun around which the earth is moving. That's why it gives us the impression that the sun is rising and setting. Similarly, this changeful ego, the basis of the ego is pure. But just like the setting sun and the rising sun, the ego sometimes we feel proud of ourselves, sometimes we feel depressed, we feel we are useless. That pride suddenly goes away, we feel morose, we feel dejected. So that false identification with the psychophysical system. Psycho means mental, sukshma, physical means body. So this body-mind complex is a big impediment. That is why the idea of pure consciousness is emphasized again and again. What happens when you do japa? The japa sadhana, the idea is the sound symbol that you repeat mentally, the subtle mantra that you repeat, has behind it mantra chaitanya. There is a thing known as mantra chaitanya. So very often the mantra does not have the desired effect because you are doing it mechanically. But if you do it with full conscious, if you are conscious of the power of the mantra, which that consciousness suddenly flashes as a result of regular practice. That is what everybody says. If you see Virajananji's book and all the books, they say mantra chaitanya, mantra appears to be mechanical in the beginning. You go on repeating again and again, and suddenly that mantra becomes chaitanya. Consciousness awakens in the mantra faster than any other object. So you superimpose the mantra, you do mantra sadhana, and constant repetition of the mantra, it infuses in every action of ours the chaitanya very easily. The thing that I was doing mechanically, now because you are doing the mantra along with that action, That is why Holy Mother says, just go on repeating. Japat Siddhi, Japat Siddhi. Just go on repeating the japa. In the beginning, it will appear to be very gross, but slowly it has the inherent power. It doesn't lose its luminosity. The mantra Chaitanya is never lost. So it superimposes all the gross things which are with which we identify ourselves. So these gross things, the gross ideas, the gross objects. So the mantra has to be superimposed on the personality, our own personality first. And then you superimpose it on the objects that you see. Immediately that object reveals the Chaitanya behind it. First the mantra reveals its own Chaitanya, its own consciousness. There is a thing known as mantra Chaitanya. These bijas are very powerful. When you repeat the mantra, it has a capacity to reveal its Chaitanya. That is why Virajananji and all used to say, if you perform lakhs and lakhs of japa, one day you will find that same mantra becomes Chaitanya. It is known as mantra Chaitanya. Then that mantra really starts having effect. Then you see everything around you, all the movements, all the changes, all the development, or all degeneration also, they pertain to the apparent man. I am one with the mantra. I am one with my Ishta. That is another way of doing it. We cannot think of the self. That is why we consider that Brahman to be embodied in the japa or in the mantra or in the Ishta, the form of the Ishta. And when we superimpose that Ishta, when we superimpose that mantra on external objects which confuse us, which degenerate us, which make us sad when we lose them, that time this mantra Chaitanya helps us, that pure consciousness shows us that you have not lost anything. Because first of all, it was your wrong identification that you thought this mind is yours, this body is yours, this wealth is yours. Everything was there beforehand. Prakriti has just pushed these things towards you. That's the play of Prakriti. She gives these toys like a mother. She just wants to keep the child engaged. So what she does, she just pushes some toys, and the child is totally lost in the small toys and he feels very happy. And it's only when he is tired of the toys, then he says, no, 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 I want my mother. She has fooled me by giving me these toys. So similarly, when we Japat Siddhi or the mantra, what happens is, it helps us, because that becomes the predominant sadhana of our life. Mother says, you superimpose anything that is temporary by the mantra Chaitanya, which is permanent. In the beginning, that mantra is not Chaitanya. It is just like any other object, but it is a far superior object, a far superior vibration. So when that vibration is superimposed on the lesser vibrations, on the things, on the temporary things, then that mantra has that potency to remove that apparent outer covering and reveal the Chaitanya inside that object. As I said, consciousness is one. The jiva thinks that, oh, this is consciousness. The consciousness is not something that we have to, it is self-luminous. It is within us. The jivatma is one with the Paramatma. Only thing is, we don't know, or Brahman. The jivatma and the Brahma, or the small self, is one with the higher self. But why do we realize that as limited? And if we realize the apparent self as the real self, then what happens? We keep on thinking that I have lost this, I have gained this. Sometimes we feel happy, sometimes we feel sad. So to remove that, this Upanishad says, if you want eternal peace, there is only one way. You have to realize that consciousness which is within and identify with the consciousness that is behind everything else in the universe. So that is why in that context, Brahma Satya Jagan Mithya. Jagan Mithya means not that the Jagat does not exist. It exists, but it is temporary. Mithya means temporary. Jiva Brahmaiva Napara means Jiva is nothing but Brahman, but unfortunately we don't realize. So the route given to realize this is through constant superimposition of the mantra Chaitanya on the Chaitanya, which has to be unlocked in every object, in every person, in every action of ours. We don't realize the Chaitanya. It is just like a big wave and the small wave has as its background water. You can't say this small wave doesn't have water. It has less water. The big wave has big water, more water. But when it becomes level, when the waves collapse, when the big wave collapse, the small wave, they become one with the ocean. So consciousness is always unitary. That's why the Upanishad says you have to realize that unitary consciousness, then only you will be full of peace. Na itaresham, not for others. Others will still be troubled by these forms and names and forms. So that is the idea. So when all movements, all our changes, all the development, all our degeneration, if we know that they pertain to the apparent man, they do not belong to me. That is the whole of sadhana. So some people say man is mortal. Man is born with lot of potentialities. I have to intellectual, aesthetic, moral, and spiritual attainments. They are the special privileges. That's why our topic is known as Vedanta and the science of human possibilities. So there are many possibilities. We cannot deny it. We have physical possibilities which enable us to strengthen our body and strengthen our senses. We have mental possibilities which give us a grasp of the subjects that we are studying. We are wiser than other people. We are more capable than other people. We can manage better than other people. That is intellectual. Then we have aesthetic. Some people can appreciate art, they can appreciate music because they are slightly refined. Then there are some people who are moral. They don't have any idea of the spirit or consciousness, but they just want to do good. They say, because doing good makes me happy and makes me noble, or at least for sake of name and fame. Oh, people consider me to be a very noble-hearted, large-hearted person, so I should do charity. So, so all the intellectual, the aesthetic, the moral attainments, ultimately in the ladder of evolution, you have to have that spiritual attainment. That is the special possibility or the special privilege of man. So Sri Ramakrishna says, other things, he doesn't say that you have to discard all other things, but you have to realize someday or the other that to realize God is the one goal of human life. So man is potentially divine, but he has to uncover, he has to remove the covering, remove ajnana, and attain freedom from all bondages and suffering. So only such a person gets freedom, a person who really wants it. Virtue, vice, wisdom, folly, happiness, unhappiness, everything refer to the apparent man. So a Kaschit Dhira, a wise person, knows that this is the apparent man. That's why Nachiketa understood when Yama told him that if you want to know the secret, try to realize that Atman within. How do you do it? By withdrawing your senses. Kashit dhira antaratmanam aikshat. Avrutta chakshu. Chakshu is just a sample, one of the senses. We have to see that the senses don't go outward and focus on the real man which is within. Otherwise, the apparent man will make us identify ourselves with our ego. Either that ego will go and attach with our wealth or our health or our size, our personality. There are many ways, many aspects of our personality to which the ego will go and attach. And as a result, we will have experiences, bitter experiences, good experiences, if somebody praises us. But the transcendental self, the self which is within, Kashit Dhira Antaratma, Antaratma, the Atma which is within, it is the witness of all these changing conditions and which is set up by the ego. And though the ego tries to create some mischief, if you detach yourself from the ego, then the Upanishad says the blissful glory of the ever shining Atman reveals itself. Apparently, it was limited by the ego, but just as a witness, it never vanishes. It transcends all the changing states of the body and the mind and the organs, and it is eternally. It's not that my self-consciousness, I can't say that after a certain stage that transcendental self becomes the self in all, the self of the universe. That is why when Swami Shardanandji went to Sri Ramakrishna, he gave him certain mantras and certain sadhana to perform. But he said, no, I have to reach a stage where I can see God in everything. I mean, he wanted to have that experience of the seeing the same, perceiving, not just imagining or intellectually understanding. He had a great desire that I should see that Brahman everywhere. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, what I taught you will not lead to that. It will lead to that, but that is a very difficult thing that you are asking. You ask for something else. Then Sharat Maharaj said, no, till I get that experience, I will not be satisfied. You give me mantra, you give me all the other sadhanas, I'll do it. But I will not rest. I insist as a guru that you give me that experience of seeing the same blissful self everywhere. So these are not just stories, they are real incidents, real experiences, because of which all these wonderful scriptures have been written, the gospel has been written. These are all recordings of the wonderful experiences they had. And because they are eternal, they are based on eternal values, they are still surviving. Otherwise, if somebody had intellectually written something about Brahman, Atman, and then published a book, the whole society will just forget that. Because it's an intellectual product. It has no value. There's no experience behind it. But when we go to these prophets, they have a kind of eternal impact on human beings, not just one generation. As the days pass, the incarnation, the ideas of the incarnation spread further and wider. So that is the test of spirituality. If things give you eternal life, whether it's the Upanishad or gospel or any other book or the mantra and the guru, whatever gives you eternal life, whatever helps you to reveal the divinity that is within, that should be undertaken. That is the goal of human life. So, there is a beautiful imagery which I will not discuss now. We are almost running out of time. There is the Mundaka Upanishad in the 3rd chapter. There is a beautiful, I mean, you can say, very figuratively, the poet says, I mean, the Upanishad Rishi says that there were 2 birds, Dvasuparna Sayuja Sakaya Samanam Vriksham Parishasvajate. So 2 birds, they were inseparable companions and they have similar names. One is Jivatma, another is the Paramatma. So they dwell in the same tree, that is the body. It's not that Paramatma resides in heaven or somewhere else. It resides in the same body. One of the two birds. This is an imagery. We have to understand, not take it literally. One of the 2 birds eats the fruits of varied tastes. And sometimes it tastes bitter fruit, then it becomes sad. Sometimes it tastes sweet fruit, it becomes happy. So the other just is looking as a witness. It is just seeing the folly of the other bird. It says how much it is suffering. So clinging to the same tree, the individual soul, the ego becomes bewildered, it becomes helpless and laments. That is why the Kathopanishad says, if you want to get rid of, if you want to be peaceful, if you want to get eternal peace, then you have to get rid of things that give you grief, that gives you restlessness. So he becomes free from grief if he follows the wonderful wisdom of the Upanishads, the Vedanta. So when he finds that, as this Mundaka Upanishad says that there are two birds, one is watching the other one is eating bitter fruits and sweet fruits and then becoming happy, but the other bird, it is it is witnessing the whole panorama of this prakriti. It doesn't eat any fruits, it is just happy with the way it is. So we have to be our own selves. That is the idea. The other sadhanas, the yogas that we do, it is just to enable this phenomena to happen, this unity of Jivatma with the Paramatma. Whether you do it through your emotion, which is Bhakti Yoga, do it through your intellect, try to think deeply again and again and again, Shravana, Manana, Nididhasana. That is the Jnana Marg, the path of Jnana. But because the most popular and the most easy is the mixture of Tantra, Yoga and Vedanta, which is the mantra yoga. We can call it mantra yoga. That has become more popular. It's nothing but a mixture of karma yoga and bhakti yoga. If you are devoted to the Ishta, it is nothing but bhakti yoga. The same japa, if you do as a kriya, as a karma, that I have to do so much japa, then it becomes karma yoga. And if you do it with devotion, try to imagine the Lord within, who is your supporter, who helps you, who gives you security, then it becomes bhakti yoga. And of course, when you meditate, when you repeat the name, repeat the mantra, then it becomes Raj Yoga and meditate the center of the heart. So this bird, the bird imagery, we'll discuss it in the next class. There are two birds. One has tasted the bitter and sweet fruits of life, and later on, perhaps it envies the quiet bird. It says, "Oh, see my." It sees the Paramatma. The Jivatma is so tired or so disgusted with its journey in the world. It sees the Paramatma. It sees the other bird, which is not eating any bitter fruit, nor is it eating any sweet fruit. It just says, "You do all the eating. I don't want to get involved in all these things." So that is how our personality works. And then we come to the next point, that what leads us to this highest goal? What exactly do we have to do? Whether you do mantra yoga, bhakti yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, whatever yoga you do, what happens to that person? He becomes a master of his own self. That is known as self-mastery. Swamiji says, now we are not masters of our own self. Anything we want to do, nature forces us to do something else. We try our best. We decide that from tomorrow we'll do this, from tomorrow we'll do that. But then our wish, our will, it is not free. Something is dictating. So that disgust when you feel that I should be a master of myself. Why should others dictate? Why should circumstances dictate to me? That is why Swamiji told his disciple in one of his letters, he says, life is the unfoldment of a being under circumstances which are trying to press it down. So the circumstances, Prakriti will always try to press it down. That is Prakriti's role, to spread ignorance. And sadhana tries to reverse the process. So circumstances are trying to press you down, and you are trying to unfold that divinity within, which can tackle this circumstances. The only way you can tackle the circumstances is to discover the true self, which is nothing but the Paramatma, and the glory and the power of the Lord. Whether you do it through mantra, do it through bhakti, through jnana, the power of the Lord, the Paramatma, and your identity with that Paramatma helps you to gain some kind of self-mastery. Then you become a master of your own self. And then that leads to the highest goal. So we will discuss this in the next class. So let us see if there are some questions. Yeah, there are 3 questions. First is, is Parama Prakriti different from Purusha, or they are equivalent terms? Parama Prakriti is something which is explained that just before manifestation, as The Bible says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So when the Word was God, when it had not separated, then it is known as Parama Prakriti. So Prakriti is the manifestation that we see. But just before, though Brahman and Shakti, Brahman, the Purusha and Prakriti, are, you can say that these are two realities, and they cannot live or exist without each other. Advaita, of course, says there's no Purusha, no Prakriti, there's only one. The only Purusha, the only Brahman exists, all others doesn't exist. So they are equivalent terms in that way. If you take the tantric view, then Parama Prakriti, or the pure Shakti, and Brahma Abhed. Thakur himself said, Brahma or Shuddha Shakti Abhed, or Shakti Abhed. When he said Shakti, he meant the Parama Prakriti. So that is, they are equivalent. I mean, they are two sides of the same coin. You can't say equivalent because they have different functions. In Sankhya, at least, we have to differentiate. One is Prakriti, another is the consciousness, that's Purusha. Whereas when you go to Advaita, they say only Purusha exists, only Brahman exists. This is just because of ignorance. You just remove the ignorance and you stand in your own glory. So each attitude has some significance, and we have to understand it in the proper context. Now, if ego is temporary, then we should concentrate on sadhana only, then get Chaitanya, is it not it? But Chaitanya doesn't come till the ego is there. If ego is temporary, but temporary things cling to us, isn't it? Why are we troubled? It is because of the temporary things only. Temporary money, temporary car, temporary relatives, everything that is temporary is a cause of trouble. So how can you say that the ego is temporary, so I don't care? You have to care. Even if it is temporary, you have to try to see the permanent behind the temporary. That's the idea. So we have to focus on sadhana, that is, try to get the Chaitanya, mantra Chaitanya, or pure consciousness. But when you are doing it, when you are the process to attain to that mantra Chaitanya or the pure Chaitanya, when you do, it increasingly convinces you. There is a conviction in your mind that these temporary things, I may deal with them now and then, but ultimately I have to give it up. So that idea only, if the Chaitanya is realized, the mantra Chaitanya, or the due to sadhana, you realize that you are the consciousness, the Jivatma is one with the Paramatma, then this idea of temporary ego and all will not exist. Everything will vanish. All the darkness, as Thakur used to say, take a matchstick and burn it, then thousands of years, maybe that room was always dark. But somebody thought, let us open the door and light a matchstick. So he says, does it become luminous slowly? No, the moment you strike the matchstick, there is light and you see everything. For 1,000 years, it was dark and totally dark. People used to be afraid, but Thakur says, the moment you light a matchstick, everything stands revealed. So it happens all of a sudden. So even if you try to realize the mantra Chaitanya behind the mantra, still you have to be careful that temporary things do not stick to you. They may be temporary. We know that ego is temporary, the body is temporary. But how many of us really believe? If we had really believed it is temporary, then like Thakur, we would spend our whole day in trying to find out what is permanent, what is God. But we don't have that. We have to live a little bit with temporary. We just can't give it. That is why ego may be temporary, but it is so difficult. If one feels that the ego is temporary, then there is no problem. Then he is already a Jivan Mukta. Okay? So I'll take your leave now. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.